we have Professor Christopher Isike, who's going to be talking to us still on soft power as a contextual basis in diplomacy. So it's just following that, and I think he's going to look at it from another perspective. Just to talk about Professor, he's Professor of African Politics and International Relations in the Department of Political Science, University of Pretoria, and he's the director of the African Center for Study of the United States, University of Pretoria, South Africa. He's also the current president of the African Association of Political Science. Professor Chris conducts research from an African lens, Africanist lens, and teaches international relations theories, strategic and security studies, and security theory at the University of Pretoria. His research interests include African soft power politics, women, peace and conflict studies, women and political representation in Africa, rethinking state formation in Africa, politics in a digital era, and African immigration to South Africa. He's also the editor-in-chief of African Foremost Political Science journal, Politikon, South Africa Journal of Political Studies. So many things, but at this point I'll give him the stage. Professor Chris, you have the stage, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Patricia. Greetings to LaDonna, Dr. Slatko, and everyone else who's here. It's a pleasure to meet you again, and thank you for keeping up organizing this very important conference. So I will just go straight to using my 25 minutes to, it's 25 minutes, right? 20 or 25? How many minutes do I have?
25 minutes.
Right, okay, so let me rush.
Yes.
All right, so like Dr. Slatko just said, soft diplomacy and soft power are two related concepts that are often interchangeably used, but they refer to, and he said this as well, slightly different aspects of international relations. So there are concepts of international relations, they are very interrelated, but they're also slightly different. So I'll just do a quick definition or conceptualization of both, and then carry on to what I wanted to talk about today much. So soft diplomacy refers to the use of non-coercive means to influence the attitude and behavior of foreign governments. It involves employing strategies, such as cultural exchange, humanitarian aid, educational programs, and diplomacy to foster cooperation and understanding between countries. Yeah. So in essence, it is more about the tools of diplomacy than the substance or resources of diplomacy. All right. So soft diplomacy focuses on the tools, how to get diplomacy done, without the use of force. And this is where it is different from soft power, on the other hand, which refers to the ability of a country to achieve its objective through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion. And in that way, they bit related. But like I said, soft power concerns itself more with the substance or resources of diplomacy. So a country needs to have soft power resources to be able to use soft diplomacy effectively, and that's why the operative concept here is soft power. And that's the one I really would want to talk about a bit more. And like Dr. Slatko said, the major proponent of soft power is American political scientist Joseph Nye, who defined it, as the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payment. He also sees this as the ability to affect others to obtain outcomes one wants through attraction instead of payment or the use of coercion. According to him, soft power is essentially premised on the power of attraction, ideas, or the ability to set the political agenda and determine the framework of debate in a way that shapes the preference of other players. So in essence, it is the power of attraction that leads the country with attractive, soft power resources to have influence over the one that is attracted. So it goes beyond just the tools or the use of soft diplomacy to achieve short-term, foreign policy objectives. So countries mobilize these non-physical, abstract, objective, and often subtle attribute of power in 3 dimensions, which, according to NAI, include, culture. I was pleased when Dr. Slatko talked about cultural diplomacy. And then there's also political values when they live up to them at home and abroad. And this is very, very important because a country can profess a political value and not live up to them abroad. A good example would be the United States, that is, the vanguard of democracy. But you can ask questions around its own democratic practice, especially when we consider democratic backsliding that's been occurring in the US in the last, especially under the last US president, right? So it's not enough to just have the political values, you have to live up to them, both at home and abroad. And of course, foreign policy, when they are seen to be legitimate and having moral authority. And this is very important, especially when you consider Russia's current war in Ukraine and how it is not gaining traction in certain aspects of the war. So in this sense, culture refers to the values, the norms, and practices that give meaning to a society in forms such as literature, arts, music, entertainment, tourism, popular media, as well as even indigenous products. So countries can use a number of sources, resources, values to project these forms of soft power, which then becomes assets that produce the attraction that then bestows influence, authority, or power, if you like. So soft power is centered on resources such as the culture of a nation, like we said, its norms and values, its foreign policy, which reflects these values. And some of these could also include, movie products, the educational system that the country has, its ability and practice of giving humanitarian aid, developmental assistance, and a host of other forms of, public diplomacy programs such as broadcasting, cultural exports, and exchanges. So let me, okay, maybe it's important to say that there has been increasing evidence of the recognition of the potency of soft power, despite its challenges, and I'll talk about those in a bit, as an essential, component of power status. And it is also beginning to pass the measurability test, which is a major challenge of soft power. Countries are also beginning to pay closer attention to the, the intricacies of culture, political ideology, and diplomacy as a subtle weapon in the changing international relations landscape. And I will talk about this landscape, which actually also, provides a systemic basis, for soft power. So major powers such as the United States, China, and then you can talk about middle powers like Canada, Australia, Norway, beginning to become a bit more important in this regard as well. Do not deny the potency of soft power instruments in building a positive image for themselves in world affairs. And this enables them to generate greater levels of respect and admiration from other countries. And I dare say that this is one area that Russia is weak. And some have argued it actually affects its fortunes in the war in Ukraine, in terms of the fact that it has not been able to garner the kind of support you would have thought a former, a superpower of its stature would have garnered from the international system. I mean, if you look at the United Nations General Assembly votes, the last 3 that we've had in the last 1 year. So to summarize, soft power and soft diplomacy and soft power play, crucial roles in the foreign policy of states by fostering relationships, promoting development, and shaping international perceptions. And these are important, like I said, in the case of the Russian war. And these provide opportunities for cooperation, for dialogue, for mutual understanding, and for relationship building in the international system. I must add, though, that soft power, like I said before, does have its challenges. One of them is the fact that it is very difficult to measure because it's not usually something that's tangible, just like you can have with hard power. But it is also not always enough on its own, without hard power. So soft power, in other words, complements hard power, and the country's ability to combine both soft power and hard power is what makes the effective use of power, and that's referred to as soft power. Of course, there are also challenges around its conceptualization, or the conceptualization of power, soft power, like Dr. Slacko said, that soft power is not, power cannot be soft. But then this is also, this weakness is based on the assumption that power, though is influence and domination over another, is necessarily for evil purposes, for negative purposes. There are times when power can be used, influence can be used for good, right? So having said that, and maybe we can engage, during the question and answer sessions around this point. But I want to now go to the point of the changing international system and understanding of power, and this is important to the last point I just made about what is power and to what effect, what use is power put to. And I would want to a quote from Bertrand Badi, who said in 1945 that and I quote, in 1945, the world population amounted to 2.5 billion people. The United Nations counted 51 members. The world environment was ignored. Nowadays, we have moved from an international world to a global world. The world population amounts to more than 7.5 billion people. This is in 2020, it was writing. The UN is constituted by 193 members. Europe is no longer the battlefield of the world, although that has changed now with what's happening in Ukraine. While the main conflicts, international issues, social needs, threats to human security, and the demographic pressures are located in the global south. Power is becoming powerless. The US superpower does not win the wars, and even weakness seems currently more efficient than power. Therefore, he asks, is weakness politics about to be substituted for power politics? This is an excerpt from a book Badi wrote about the changing international system in 2020, early 2020, just before COVID. Now, although he was questioning why we continue to use the same paradigm of realpolitik, hard power, to explain international relations in the 21st century, despite its irrelevance and inadequacy in this regard, the quote I just read from also underscores the reality of a socio-political world that is increasingly defined by emerging issues that give new meanings to the concept of power. And this is why I think that this is important. Now, these issues, many of which were framed as human security vulnerabilities, including unconventional conflicts such as terrorism and global epidemics, and we can talk about the COVID-19 in this regard, or Ebola, they could be regarded as critical junctions given how they are shaping the tenor or the character of global politics, all right? Now, many of the intrastate conflicts that we saw immediately after the end of the Cold War from 1991, we can talk about, a civil war in Rwanda, Bosnia and Herzegovina, all of these insurgencies and guerrilla warfares in Africa and different parts of the world, many of them were exported beyond national borders. And it is in this context we should understand the spread of international terrorism and the global war on terrorism. These interconnected issues and transnational threats necessarily imply or give new meanings to the concept of power and its use in the international system. And this is why Badi argues that globalization in the post-Cold War era has also resulted in what he calls the socialization of the international system, which he then refers to as intersocial relations instead of international relations, because the issues that define the international system are more social in terms of whether you look at the environment. They are more human security based. If you look at the economy, if you look at food insecurity, health insecurity, as we saw with COVID, they all underscore the implication of a changing meaning and usage of power over a world that was previously interstate, very statist and realist. And this is how we must try and see the world. So, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought the entire world to a standstill in 2020, March, April of 2020, can still be understood in this context of changing power relations. If you look at how powerful countries of the world, capitulated to COVID-19, sometimes in even worse fashion than we saw in the global south, especially in Africa. We all remember the prognosis that was given that because Africa was not a powerful country, had weak health systems, was going to collapse under COVID, but that didn't happen. So those are some of the issues. But to bring it back, the whole point of this is that, soft power in a changing world where power is beginning to have different meanings. Once powerful countries like the United States could not deal with COVID, whereas less powerful countries like Sweden, like Denmark, like Finland had, dealt better, were more effective in dealing with the COVID-19 threats. Then it forces us to then begin to think about power differently. And the point we're making is that soft power presents, such an opportunity, even though Russia's war in Ukraine has taken the sting of soft power in some ways. So the real question I want to try and address in the next 10 minutes that I have is what opportunities exist for African diplomacy through soft power. Now, unlike big hard soft power countries such as the US, China, the UK, Canada, if you like, and maybe Australia beginning to emerge, most African countries do not have hard power capabilities to make them globally competitive in a realist world, okay? And even though I said that the international world is changing, the continent does have an opportunity, because it has an abundance of soft power resources and potentials, which it can use to rack up, global admiration, and then, it can combust these resources into influence and, of course, into some kind of power that can enable it to punch above its weight. And if you look at countries like Nigeria, like South Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Egypt, these are good examples of soft power. And if I'm to talk about Nigeria very quickly, we can talk about its soft power attributes such as its cultural exports, its film, Nollywood, its music, its dress, its food, and other, indigenous products such as its mega churches. And you can also look at its political and iconic personalities, such as Fela Kuti, Chimamanda Adichie, amongst others. And then you can also look at its sporting accomplishments, its role in peacekeeping and mediation, and the provision of public goods through the Technical Aid Corps in much of West Africa during the 90s, and it continues to do so in much of the continent. And it's, of course, you can talk about its Afrocentric foreign policy and the general policy of good neighborliness, even though there are those who argue that it didn't do much of that when it sent Ghanaians packing out of Nigeria in the 80s. And then for South Africa, you can also look at its media export, its political ideas, and its constitutionally enshrined values of rule of law, bill of rights. You remember that South Africa is touted as having the most liberal constitution in the world, whatever that means. Its vast array of iconic personalities, again, like Nigeria, such as Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and recently we have people like Tuli Mandela coming up. All of these people help to garner political goodwill for South Africa. You can also talk about its multinational companies, its prestigious universities, cultural exports, its hospitality, and many others. Of course, its recent issues of xenophobia, or what we call Afrophobia, that is targeted at Africans especially, have tended to subtract from South Africa's soft power. And if you listen to the news, just yesterday, the United States ambassador to South Africa accused the South African government of supporting Russia by giving arms, or if not selling arms, to Russia to aid the killing of Ukrainians. These are allegations that have been put out there. The South African government is denying it, but if they prove to be true, they again tend to subtract from South Africa's soft power value as a country that believes in human rights, equality of being, and the use of multilateralism and diplomacy as a tool of conflict resolution rather than war, right? But these are characteristics, these are soft power values the country has that are profoundly important in shaping a positive international image for South Africa, and that can also enable it to set the agenda for international discourse by championing a multilateral diplomacy that is rooted in its Ubuntu worldview. And this is how I would answer one of the questions that was asked by someone around how soft power can help to promote ethical values that are consistent with the moral rules and duties that guide our actions. I think somebody put that on the comment. I think that is Eric Muhia. South Africa has the opportunity, though it hasn't used it much in the case of the war in Ukraine, had the opportunity, based on its value of Ubuntu, as Ubuntu that sees the world as an interconnected, whole, where everyone is equal and everyone has a role to play in ensuring the common good of all. And South Africa espoused this during the COVID-19. If you remember that South Africa actually led the COVAX a vaccine push that got most of the vaccines to many African countries. So it was a leader, and it was constantly pushing for a world that is interconnected, underscoring the fact that there was no need for world powers to hoard vaccines because it was not going to help them. And South Africa was really a leader during that time. So if South Africa believes in Ubuntu, an interconnected world, a world where you use peace as a respect for human rights as a basis for resolving conflict, that is a value that is ethical, that is moral, and it can be pushed to replace the current, realist, hawkish notion of rights, might is right, and military, and which feeds or builds on to feed the kind of militarist, warlike approaches to international relations as we know it. So the institutionalization of a good number of South Africa's soft power capabilities has made it to leverage its soft power potentials and capabilities a bit better than Nigeria, although, like I said before, the xenophobia issue and this accusation of selling weapons to Ukraine has tended to subtract from all of this. But the real point I'm trying to make, I guess, is in the context of Africa, more broadly, soft power and soft diplomacy can be used by, our governments and international organizations like the African Union to build relationships and promote our interests in the continent and in the world as a whole. And this can take many forms, including providing development assistance, cultural exchange, and humanitarian aid, diplomacy in Africa. And this can be woven around the continent's soft power resources, which we have in abundance. We do not have the economic and military capability to impose our will in Africa on the rest of the world, the way we have seen superpowers like America and China, maybe Russia, do and continue to do. Now, Africa's best bet is to be more intentional about using its soft power resources as the basis of its diplomatic engagement on all fronts with the rest of the world. And it can stand a chance when it does this. It can stand a chance of punching above its weight while slowly building to develop other soft power, other power capabilities, whether they be hard or smart over time. I would stop here and hope that I can get an opportunity to talk more. Thank you.